Today's episode is brought to you by beer. Hey guys, today we're running some 6G pipe tests. Been getting a lot of questions about 6G aluminum. I put out a video on welding pipe, aluminum pipe a while back, and that's where I've been getting most of my questions. Anyways, today we're doing the 6G aluminum pipe. The reason on the last video on aluminum pipe I just rolled it, roll out work, is because that's the only way that I could get good arc shots on it. I welded this guy up. You can't get the camera into all those angles unless you have a cameraman, and I don't have one. And learning how to run that camera with the filters on it, getting the right settings, keeping your focus through that would be really hard, especially for someone that's never done it. So if you need the arc shots to help you, go back to that rollout video. If I'm smart enough, I'll put the link somewhere up here. Just click on it right now if it's there. If not, I was too stupid. But go back to that video, watch that for the arc shots. This, I'll give you tips on the vertical parts and tying in and all that. You'll watch me weld it, but you can't actually see the puddle while I'm welding. So now that it's sanded down at a 45, I'm just going to deburr the inside. This is a deburring tool. You can pick them up really at any welding supply shop. It just basically cuts the burr off, makes it nice and smooth inside. You don't really manhandle it, you just kind of let it do its job. So if you wanted like the ultimate clean, what you'd do is you'd actually go around this whole thing with a file, all around the bevel, make sure there's no burrs on the top, on the sides, and then you'd hit this whole piece here with the file also. Knock that whole thing down, but just for a video I'm not going to do it. I might just wire brush it because this has been sitting around for a little bit. So if you're going to be welding, especially on a test like we're pretending this is, you really want to wire brush it all. And the reason why you're wire brushing it, it breaks off the oxide layer, but you're not just breaking or removing the oxide layer, because with aluminum the oxide layer actually just forms right back on as soon as it gets scraped off. It's constantly growing and adding an oxide layer, but if it's been sitting around, dirt and debris, anything that's in the shop, and especially if it's been outside, is landing on top of the oxide layer of the aluminum, and then it's kind of growing around those little microscopic specks and all that stuff. So those are actually encased in the aluminum. You'll see it in old aluminum especially that's been outside, and that's actually why it's shiny underneath, is because the cloud that forms with the oxide layer that's sucking in all the specks and stuff traps that. So when you're doing this with the wire brush, it's cutting that out, basically removing all the debris. And if you don't do this, then when you weld, your cleaning action does a good job of cleaning the oxide layer, burning that off to get to the actual aluminum, but it doesn't clean dirt. So it's basically like welding on a dirty piece of metal, because it's just going to suck all that dirt or oil that was on there before in. So especially if it's old, if it's brand new, just out of the paper, we usually don't unless it's something really important. Like if it's a water pipe, if it's a fuel tank, something like that, then I'll wire brush it. But if it's brand new metal off the router table, it's good enough, it's good to go. You don't have problems welding. When you're welding older material that you haven't cleaned, your puddle doesn't flow quite as nice as it does on something that you've wire brushed and cleaned. And so you get like all these jagged lines. Your puddle almost doesn't melt as smooth all the way around. Especially with 5356 filler for some reason. I think 6061 with 5356 filler is my least favorite to weld with. 4043 on 6061 welds real nice. But 5356 is actually stronger and it's more corrosion resistant than 4043 or 4943. 4943 is my favorite to weld with. It's so smooth. Flows so nice, even on 6061. So on our wreck boats at work, that's actually what I'll use because those are going into freshwater. So it's not as corrosive as our offshore boats that go in the ocean. All the salt water is super corrosive. So we have to use 5356 on all of that stuff. 6061 is, if I remember right, the tensile strength on it is something like somewhere around 40,000 psi. But when it's welded in the heat affected zone, because it's heat treated alloy or semi, I can't remember. Anyways, it takes the tensile strength down a lot. I think it's like 25 or 28,000 psi. So even though you're using 5356, and I think the psi rating, tensile strength rating is like 30,000. The 6061 has lost a ton of its tensile strength, so it doesn't really matter if it's 4043 or 5356 strength-wise, unless you're going to heat treat it out afterwards. But 5356 is stronger. I don't know, hopefully this rambling will help somebody. Anyways, if this was going to be for a test, I would actually clean out the oxide layer on the inside, because the thinner it is in there, cleaner it is, the easier that the weld, when it sinks through, that oxide layer will raise nice and smooth. It won't be as jagged, won't be as dirty. Basically, when you're welding two parts that are put together and it penetrates through, it basically is just raising the oxide layer of this, and the puddle is pushing up, and that oxide layer is staying on top of it because there's no cleaning action from the torch inside to remove the oxide layer, so it's just pushing it up. And so that's why it'll look a little funky, but it's not sucking in any atmosphere from the backside because of that. Now I haven't personally done it, but when they gap it and weld it like regular pipe, they'll back purge it so that way you don't get the atmosphere from the other side getting sucked into your puddle. If you've welded gaps, you'll see it, like a little bit of dirtiness come in, and that's because of the atmosphere from the backside being sucked in. So this is how I prep my, this is 3-inch thin wall tubing is what we call it. It's basically 3-inch outside diameter tubing with 1/8-inch wall thickness. I like to grind a 45-degree bevel until there's just barely a landing on there. I mean, it's maybe just over a 1/16. I like it thin like that because then you don't have to use as much heat to penetrate in. So overall, the weld's going to be stronger, the material isn't going to heat up as much, and you get good penetration through that and still get good bonding, and you can do it in one pass on something this small. If I'm doing like 2-inch schedule 40, I usually still 45-degree bevel those, and that gives it enough for it to actually still get in there. And when I put them together, there's no gap, it's flush. And so when you 45-degree bevel them like this, it takes a little more heat than if you had like a J groove on there. But when it's thin like this, you can still get away with it. So 3-inch Schedule 40, if you 45-degree bevel it like this, it's a pain in the butt. You gotta really heat it up for your root pass. Then you gotta do a cover pass on it after that. But on 2-inch Schedule 40 is the most that I do, where I can do it in one pass with a 45-degree bevel. Anything over that, like 3-inch, I like a J groove. The problem is we don't have a router that can put a J groove in it, so I have to 45 it and then come in there and cut it with a basically a flap disc to get my bevel the way I like it. The reason I'm using 3-inch thin wall tubing is because it's way cheaper at my work than it is our like 2-inch Schedule 40. This I can get almost for free. So that's why I'm using it. It's not technically pipe, but it's the same welding procedure that I use. Difference between tubing and pipe: tubing is measured on the outside diameter, and pipe is kind of the inside diameter. And then they have a different schedule, so Schedule 40, and it varies from pipe thickness to pipe thickness. I think 3-inch Schedule 40 is 1/4 inch thick. And then Schedule 80 is almost double that. It's not quite 1/2 inch, it's probably 3/8. It's really weird how they go about it. So I got these sitting on V-block that I built. I'm just gonna push them in there, hold them up, and I'm gonna spin them to where basically they line up, because pipe, it almost always is somewhat oblong or egg-shaped in one direction or the other, so you kind of got to twist them and line them up if you want the optimal, you know, fit up. It's never going to be quite perfect unless you get super lucky somehow. I'm just spinning at 180. I'm going to tack on this side now. Put it in the middle and push down. It'll kind of bring them back together. And then 90 degrees from that, I'll do one. And that's all I do on my pipe stuff, because I'm going to start down here anyways, so I don't need a tack down there. So I don't know if you can really see it, but all 3 tacks penetrated in, but not overly penetrated. I just need a little. I'm going to be running over them, so they'll still burn in real nice. Alright, so I got it setting up on this positioner. I never quite finished it, but this is another project for another time. Anyways, I can clock it at 45. It makes it a little easier, so I figured I'd use this. I raised up the base of it. Yeah, you can see that. Raised up the base. I would like it a little taller. I like it to be basically, when I'm at the top, it's just a little bit under my face. That way you don't have to come down on like one knee, come up, and then it's just too low, you know. So in my opinion, 6G isn't as hard as like a 5G, but this is used for a ton of qualifications because it goes all positions. You're doing kind of overhead, so I consider it overhead. Then you're doing vertical up, even though it's kind of slanted. And then you're doing your regular 1G when you get to the top, pretty much. So that's why they use this. I don't know why they don't just use 5G, because you're doing actual overhead, vertical up, and then you're doing flat when you get to the top. And I don't know, it just seems a lot harder than this, because with the 5G you've got to go from straight down to straight up. But with 6G you can kind of just come in from the side and roll over. My personal opinion. So I had my machine maxed out at 220 amps. That's just personal preference. I just like to adjust with the foot pedal. I had my machine set at 60 Hertz and my balance was 61 because I basically made it like a transformer machine. That's pretty much what my SyncWave 250 at work runs at. And whenever I'm doing awkward pipe, I'm always using that SyncWave because it's, you know, usually in a boat and the Dynasty is hooked up at my workstation. So that's what I'm used to. So I figure it'll be a lot easier than learning something new on the fly here. Yeah, I got the new gloves. Actually, Jody sent me these. If you listen to podcasts, make sure you check out his podcast. It's actually Jody Collier, Jonathan Lewis, and Roy Crumrine. Super cool dudes. Great podcast. They actually had me on an episode last summer. Let's see, episode 154. So yeah, check that out. It has my background on there, and it was just a lot of fun. Actually, Roy made these t-shirts for me. These sweatshirts and t-shirts. He took my logo and then just kind of redesigned it, made it easy for him to print. So yeah, it was pretty cool. One other tip, you can bend your fill rod. I mean, it doesn't hurt anything, and it helps you get into awkward positions. So here's the first weld. Started at the bottom and moved up. I'll show you my technique in a second. What I like to do though is when I start doing vertical up, I'll actually, after I add my filler, I'll back up just a tiny bit, maybe 1/16 of an inch, and then move up, add filler, move backwards just 1/16, move forward, and that makes it not just slag down or drag down, so you don't get a real droopy weld. It kind of helps everything flow real nice. And then when I get to my tacks, I'll burn those in just like a little bit longer, make sure everything flows real nice, sinks in, and then I'll step past it. And when I'm gonna stop on a weld, if I'm gonna keep going, like I'm gonna tie into this weld, what I'll actually do is after I add my filler, I'll scooch forward like I normally would, like I'm gonna add filler again, and I'll just stop at that point. And I'll slowly taper off. And sometimes, especially on 6061, it'll crack on you. But when I start, I back up probably 2 ripples after I've let it burn in, and then start moving. It just makes your tie-in, for me personally, a lot nicer, a lot neater. It helps you burn in just a little easier. You don't have as much material to melt and burn down into the root. So that's just what I use. I mean, everybody's different, but this way I don't have to grind anything. I don't have to have a big ugly tie-in. And also, you don't have to quarter it. I like to quarter it because, as I said before, 60-61 loses a lot of strength the more it gets heated up. So it's better to just wait for it to cool down and then hit it. And if you break it into quarters, then you're not heating up the part as much. To bend your filler, you can get in there in the direction that you like a lot easier than doing this thing. You can just come over the top. Alright, so you can see my tie-in right here. Where I actually started was about right here. And once it melted in, then I backed up probably 2 ripples and started dabbing and adding. You can see right here where my finger slipped, or my hand slipped on this. I don't know if you can see it in the video, but so if you slip, you wiggle, that's kind of what's going to happen. And then I just continued on until I got to the top, tied into that tack, tapered off, and now it's time for the other side. So when I do this side, I should probably turn on my water cooler. Anyways, make sure, you know, your cord, you don't have to wrap it around you, but make sure it's out of the way. This might be in the way, but once I'm in the camera. Once I bend this, hopefully it won't be in the way. And when I'm doing my other side, I actually wrap it around this way. And I actually find this way a little bit more easy than on the other side when it's kind of backwards. Coming in upside down. You can use your right hand if you want. I don't practice enough with it. Water cooler. That's right. So right here's my tie-in. So when you start on aluminum, just get the puddle, or not the puddle started, but get the arc initiated and then use that cleaning action to clean into the groove before you start pedaling up and getting that puddle going, just to make sure everything's nice and clean. Then you add in the heat until you get the puddle to sink. Once you get that sink, you can start adding filler. Actually, you can back up and make sure it really ties in good, and then start going. So once I do that, let's see, get this torch in here maybe. So get it going, back into it, make sure it ties in good. Start going, adding your filler. And every time I add, when I'm starting to go uphill, I'll backwards, you know, maybe a 1/16th, and then move forward, add filler, backwards, forward, filler, backwards, forward, filler, backwards. And it just kind of looks like this. You know, that whole thing. Then tie into your tack, make sure it burns through, and then go forward. And what I like to do, like I said before, is move forward, then don't add any filler on, slowly taper off. And that way when I come in here to do this last quarter, I can start right here at the edge of this puddle, get it to burn down in, back down to about right here, then add filler and start moving. It helps it burn in a little easier. If it does crack out, backing up is gonna tie everything in unless that crack keeps going, and then you're just screwed. But anyways, that's how I like to do it. Normally, you know, you weld like this coming up, but if you have it low enough, you can actually come around here and weld it this way. I've never seen anything that says you can't do it that way. So you can actually do it like that, get around it. Unless the company just really doesn't want you and wants you to do this, or your school. So think outside the box. Alright, so there's the start. Here's the first quarter. That's about where I stopped. This is where I tied in. That's where my hand slipped. That was the top where I stopped. Here's the other side. That's where I stopped. That's where I tied in. And then there's the top. So there's the penetration. That does it for today's video. Hopefully you picked up some tips on welding aluminum 6G pipe. If it did help you, like it, comment something that really helped you or a question that you have. Subscribe if you're not, that way any video I upload you'll get notified. Hit that bell, that way you definitely get notified.